flap flips down on kind of a thing.
That wasn't what I had in my mind. Last week, we mentioned that we were going to start writing, just to get some practice in writing, and we have done that. Our first writing exercise was a slow motion movement exercise, and the constraints were write 1 to 2 pages about an action that takes 10 seconds or less to complete, and you're not allowed to use internal monologue. So that really puts a limit on what we can write about and what characters are doing, because we can't talk about what they're thinking. And we've both written our exercises. Today, I'm going to read mine. You have already critiqued it.
Yes.
And so you're going to provide those critiques, and I'm going to try to explain what my thoughts were on those critiques, and we're going to work through that together. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading my slow motion movement writing exercise. Bang! Tyler's legs exploded off the block with the same intensity as the official's starter pistol. The report echoed through the stadium, prompting encouraging cheers from the crowded stands. As he accelerated, his eyes darted to his left at the 7 other men in a dead sprint with him. The beads of sweat on their faces shone with a nearly blinding light that was but a small fraction of the intensity of the sun beating down on Tyler's own face. For a split second, one runner surged barely ahead of the pack, before being quickly obscured by the other competitors between him and Tyler. Go, Tyler, go! He eyed the stands to his right, catching a glimpse of his wife and 2 sons screaming with rabid intensity while shaking the American flag they held over the railing in front of them. A surge of energy coursed through him, each stride inching him past the sprinter in the adjacent lane. His eyes locked in on the finish line ahead. Every step brought him closer. Every footfall drew more energy from the screaming fans. With every heartbeat, the numbers on the clock just past the left end of the finish line grew higher and higher. As the first digit flipped from 6 to 7, a figure started to emerge in Tyler's peripheral. With a quick glance, he saw the man from lane 6 pulling ahead of the pack. Refocusing his gaze on the finish line, Tyler forced every muscle fiber to rise to the level of their training. The 7 turned to an 8. Closer, closer came the finish line. Everything else seemed to fade from view. With every impact of his shoes on the track, Tyler propelled his way towards the large 8 on the track directly in front of him, and away from the 7 men to his left. The 8 turned to a 9. The crowd's ever-increasing volume grew almost deafening. With his last 2 strides, Tyler leaned his body forward, pushing his head to lead him across the finish line. The crowd exploded with jubilant energy, and Tyler immediately looked to his left. No runners obstructed his view of the scoreboard standing directly off the track. He had just enough time to read the first line before tears blurred the words from his vision. 1. Tyler Haynes, USA, 9.54, world record.
All right. That was good. And my comments, I think the most value that we're going to get is by helping each other talk about what we can improve. I mean, we could say a lot about, well, this was good, I like this. I think the value in the exercise comes from what we can do better. At least that's the way I like to receive value, so that's the way that I shared it.
All right.
So we'll start off. The first word, bang. I think that spelled out sound effects aren't something that I recall seeing very much in the novels. And it felt like just a personal thing, so I went and searched it out, and I did find a Reddit conversation. What happens if, should I have sound effects at the beginning of the prologue? And the general consensus seemed to be, just talk about what you really experienced. And in the very next sentence, I think we could just start right there. Tyler's legs exploded off the block with the same intensity as the official's starter pistol. We talked about the sound of the pistol. I think we can go straight in there. The word exploded was a really good expressive verb. It really gets the motion going. The phrase with the same intensity as, there's a lot of motion in the mouth. I wish that there was a shorter way to say it that flowed more freely, but I'm not quite sure what that would be.
Yeah, in looking at your critique, I think matching the intensity of would be a little better. I don't know if it would be the best.
Yes.
But then back to what you mentioned about the onomatopoeia at the beginning. I didn't realize this until looking through your critiques after I had written, but in my draft of the novel that I wrote years back that we're currently finishing, the opening scene was onomatopoeia. It wasn't
Yes.
bang, it was a beep of an alarm clock.
Yes.
But I guess there's just that. I think part of that might be influenced by some movies have that where like an opening scene, you'll like it'll be black and you'll hear something like an alarm clock, or you'll hear something and then it'll open. And I think typically those aren't the top tier movies. I think those are more the Disney Channel level movies.
Disney Channel versus Disney Animation.
Right.
Yes. Okay. So we know what you think of Disney Channel movies. Okay.
I didn't say anything.
All right. Next sentence. The report echoed through the stadium. I can hear that as I read. It's like, I know what that sounds like. Really great way to draw me in. Next thing you said, prompting, encouraging cheers. Cheers are by definition encouraging. And if we're looking for one of the later edits is remove everything you can remove, that word would be a good candidate. As he accelerated, his eyes darted to his left at the 7 other men. And I can understand why in third person limited perspective, you're showing everything that's happening from the eyes of the main character. So you have to say that he saw this in order to be able to share it. I think it might be more effective since a runner who's pursuing a world record is not going to be paying attention to the people around him. He's going to be laser focused on the finish line. So it might be better to choose third person omnipotent and then describe in detail all of the things that you explicitly say that he doesn't notice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The next phrase, the beads of sweat on their faces shone with a nearly blinding light that was but a small fraction of the intensity of the sun beating down on Tyler's own face. I thought that was a bit of a puzzling comparison, to be nearly blinding and then only a fraction of the intensity of the sun. I think you might be trying to emphasize how much more intensely blinding the sun is, but the structure doesn't readily convey that on the first read.
Yeah, I think I looked into that a little bit, and I think switching it around and talking about the sun first and then the sweat afterwards. And I had a structure that I had in my mind. I can't remember what exactly it was now. But switching that around, the order in that sentence, I think would help.
Then the next one runner surged barely ahead of the pack before being quickly obscured by the other competitors. That's passive voice.
Yeah.
It's stronger to be in active voice. The next statement, go Tyler, go. I'm looking at this comment and okay, the closest names to this quote, because it's a quotation.
Yes.
It's a quotation. The closest names to that quotation are Tyler right before it and he right after it, which is also Tyler. The fact that it's his wife and 2 sons that are saying that takes a bit to discover, especially since it's in a different paragraph. Also, this would be another opportunity for third person omnipotent to comment how that cry was lost in the noise and Tyler never got to hear it or to see them. Next one, a surge of energy coursed through him. It works. I think there's a good opportunity here. If the goal is say as much as you can to draw out as much experience out of this moment, there'd be some good opportunity for some very picturesque, immersive statements there. Every step brought him closer. Every footfall drew more energy from the screaming fans. With every heartbeat, etc., the numbers on the clock. It's almost the rule of 3 here.
Right.
If you take the first 2 sentences, make them almost equal in length, start the third sentence also with every instead of with every, then you get to keep the pattern, and then that third entry gets a little bit extended.
Right. I spent a little bit trying to figure out how I would start that third sentence also with every instead of with every, but I didn't spend too much time on it. If I had gone through a second more intense edit, I probably would have spent more time figuring that out.
And if this were actually part of the novel, then it would make more sense to invest time in more of the polish. The numbers on the clock just past the left end of the finish line grew higher and higher. It's the numbers that grew higher and higher, but now in between numbers and higher, we have numbers on the clock, just past the left end of the finish line. 3 other nouns that make it hard to connect the phrase with the thing it's describing.
Yep.
As the first digit flipped from 6 to 7, if this is a mechanical clock with the flipping numbers, that's a really, really excellent word choice there. So that painted for me the picture that this is one of those a little flap flips down kind of a thing.
That wasn't what I had in my mind. I was picturing a digital clock.
And by the time I get to the bottom, I'm picturing a digital clock again too.
Right.
So maybe a different word there.
Yeah, I considered that. I was like, is flipped too mechanical?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I don't know. But yeah.
I also suggested considering taking that the first digit flipped from 6 to 7, making that a 1-sentence paragraph because of something that we'll see later on. You made the 7 turn to an 8, the 8 turn to a 9. There's an opportunity to set this up as the first of the 3.
Yes.
And not only sentence structure, but also paragraph structure. Just visibly, it makes some interesting things.
Yep.
Nothing else in the rest of that paragraph, but then the 7 turned to an 8. To make it even more dramatic and emphasize how quickly things are going, it could be 7 became 8. And that's that one tiny little brief sentence.
Right. Yep.
Next thing, Tyler propelled his way towards the large 8 on the track. An opportunity there, if there is a single word for propelled his way, he shot towards, he something.
Yeah. The word that was coming to mind was surge, but I also already used surge like 2 other times in this paragraph, and I don't want to use it a third.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Then let's see, the 8 turned to a 9. Yeah, 8 became 9.
One thing I noticed while reading through over here, the last 8 that I mentioned is the lane number that's on the track directly in front of him.
Oh, is that what that was supposed to be?
That is what that was supposed to be, the large 8 on the track directly in front of him.
Oh, on the track directly in front. On the track. Okay.
And then the 8 turned to a 9, but it wasn't that 8 that became a 9. The track isn't changing.
Okay, so that might have been...
that probably wasn't... I just
let's
now
pick
realized
a different,
that while reading
pick
through.
a different lane number.
Yep.
Yes, which might
or just
mean,
not mention the lane number.
That's true. Yep. Or just call it a lane number. The crowd's ever-increasing volume... I think what I had with the next 3 sentences, which are each separate paragraphs, just visually, to set apart that 6 became 7, paragraph of what's happening. 7 became 8, paragraph of what's happening. Then 8 became 9. Now you've got 3 sentences which could then be combined into a single paragraph, in structuring it in a way that you have to read it fast.
Yes.
To just demands to be read at that furious pace, almost leaving the reader as breathless as Tyler is.
Mm-hmm.
Then to finish up, no runners obstructed view of the scoreboard standing directly off the track. He had just enough time to read the first line before tears blurred the words from his vision. I don't know why I get when I imagine somebody else getting emotional over something, it gets me emotional. The comment here was nice ending, good use of showing the outcome and not telling. Just seeing the words blurred from his vision. I did it. Without saying I did it.
Right.
It's that last 2 characters, W-R.
Yep.
And it's the end.
Mm-hmm.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, I liked having the WR there at the end. I felt like that was particularly effective.
Those are my comments. Do you have any overall reaction just to the, I know you reacted to individual comments,
Right.
anything to the whole collective or to this experience of the exercise?
Just that there's a long way to go to become a really good writer. I think you mentioned something after we had finished our writing exercises that we're at a good high school level
I
for
think
writing.
so, yeah.
And we want to be significantly beyond that at some point, but that is going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort.
And a lot of this kind of back and forth. I think this is really, really helpful, not only in the feedback we receive, but also in what it takes to analyze what we're reading,
right?
To think about how this isn't mine, how would I make it better?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can reverse it. This is mine. How do I accept the ideas to make it better?
Yeah, because there were some things in here that some of your comments I noticed, but there were a lot also that I didn't notice. And so those especially are going to be the helpful ones while moving forward.
And while editing our own work.
Yes, and while editing our own work. So that is all we have for you for this video. We're about to, right now, record another video that will be me critiquing your scene. And that will come out actually not next week, but the week after, because it is a scene that exists in the world of our story. Mm-hmm. And so it will be a spoiler episode, and that will come out 2 weeks from today. We look forward to seeing your comments on what you thought of this paragraph.
We are still having a video next week, though.
Yes, we will have a video next week. It'll be a different one. We haven't recorded that one yet. Right. But for today, leave your comments down below on what you thought of my paragraph, how you think it could be improved, what you liked, what you didn't like, and we will see you next week.